Okay, it's 9 o'clock. You guys can get started whenever you're ready. Do you want to do the introduction first before you pull up the screen?
Yeah. Is Dr. Omugo going to do the introduction, or should I just go ahead and dive in?
I could do it and probably just introduce you and then you can start.
All right.
That's okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, good evening, wherever you are. You're welcome to our Global Ubuntu Dialogue today. And this is going to be a very different one today. We have our own very own Dr. Paul Easterling, Oga of Humanities, and he is going to be delivering his first lecture today. I'm excited because I'm so looking forward to it. And it's on, what's the topic of your course again? Collective.
Yeah, collective action. We'll deal with our early Pan-African movements.
Fantastic.
Yes.
So I'll hand over to Dr. Easterling now, and he would start. And if you're joining us today for the first time, Ebenezer, I know you already know about us, but just to inform you that we have all of our social media platforms, and you can follow us at Osiri Africa on Instagram, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook. So over to you, Dr. Paul Easterling.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Omugo. All right. Just as by way of introduction, this is the module 1 for the collective action and organizing for change and African liberation. This is our week 1 module, and we will be discussing Pan-African movements and Pan-African thought in antiquity, and what that means, and how do we understand the movement of Pan-Africanism in our world. All right. Just by way of further introduction, um, when I was approached by for this class, I was excited because I've always wanted to teach a class that dealt with the movement of African people, over the millennia, and not just centered on, what happened, when we dealt with Europeans during the time when they were able to leave their continent, colonialism and slavery and so forth. So this course, I'm very excited to deliver, and hope everybody enjoys it. All right.
Yes, please.
All right. This over there. All right. So first, by way of just definitions, so we know, what nomenclature we'll use moving forward. Um, when we talk about Pan-African nationalism or Pan-Africanism, we have two types. One is continental, that is based mainly on the continent and its outlying islands. The thought and practice directed towards the liberation and unity of the African continent. And this definition is coming from Maulana Karenga's Intro to Black Studies text. And then he says the second type of Pan-African nationalism is global, and it's thought and practice directed toward the liberation, unity, and mutual support of African people throughout the world. Now, this just connects the African continent to the diaspora. So this is for those Africans living in the United States, in Brazil, which actually has the largest population of Africans outside of Africa is in Brazil. All the Africans in Canada and the Caribbean and the UK. That's the global context of Pan Africanism. And I just want to say to Ebenezer, if you have any questions, you can jump in. Just raise your hand. I'll acknowledge you the best I can. All right. Moving forward, so what is this idea of Black nationalism? And Karenga, again, from the Intro to Black Studies text, says, it's the social thought and practice centered in the concept and conviction that African Americans are a distinct people with a distinct personality, and they have the right and responsibility to unite in order to gain the structural capacity to define, defend, and develop their own interests. All right. Now, this is a very specific type of ideology because it's based on African Americans and their struggle, their particular struggle that we've had in this country. So Black nationalism might not necessarily translate well in a continental African sense because most people there are already Black. So it takes on a different tone and texture once this ideology spreads throughout the world. And I wanted to put that out there to provide different context of the diversity of African thought, when it comes to how we function as a collective of both, in a global context, in a more specific context, where we're talking about the United States or Brazil or somewhere on the continent. Again, this definition is region specific and does not necessarily include the interests of African people and other nations. And that's what I was just saying. The definition is also based on racial consciousness, not cultural consciousness. And that is extremely important point, that to understand yourself from a quote unquote Black point of view, whether as opposed to an African point of view, kind of reduces the person to their color identity rather than their cultural identity. And as we move along in this course, and with Osiri University, cultural consciousness is, I think, our primary objective rather than simply a racial consciousness. Excuse me. John Henrik Clark speaks to this point. He says it's time for Black people to stop playing the separation game of geography, of where the slave ship put us down. We must instead concentrate on where the slave ship picked us up. And again, this is specifically speaking to those Africans in the diaspora who may have a more of a color consciousness or even a nationalistic consciousness, being if you're Jamaican or Dominican or Brazilian, and base it more on the cultural context. All right. And he argues that when we speak about Black people, wherever they are in the world, their name must reflect three things: land, history, and culture. And again, he argues that Black people, when Black people call themselves Black, it tells people what you look like, but it doesn't necessarily tell you who you are. All right. And again, we want to focus away from just the surface understanding of what it means to be African to a more cultural context. All right. Just to put it in context, I'm light skinned, so anywhere in the world, I can be seen as brown skin. I can easily blend into a number of different contexts just based on skin color. But my cultural consciousness is African, and that's the point that John Henrik Clark was trying to get to. That we need to focus on land, history, and culture rather than the pure aesthetics of our skin color. You have any questions so far, Mr. Ebenezer? You're on mute. Okay. You good?
Excellent intro to that.
All right. All right. I just want to make sure you
But
stay
I have
with
some
me.
contribution at the end of the.
Excuse me?
I have some contribution from my readings, which is other than the material you provided to add, and I guess you may be interested.
Okay. Okay. We'll keep moving along, and then we'll talk a little bit more about your questions as we move along.
Thank you.
All right. All right. So just wanted to give a few more understandings of what Pan-Africanism means. Dr. E.B. Du Bois, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois argued that the Pan-African movement is an aid to the promotion of national self-determination among Africans under African leadership and for the benefit of Africans themselves. And I think this argument comes out of his participation in developing the African Union back in the early 20th century. So he's speaking from a very nationalistic point of view. And again, there's no judgment either way. I'm just giving you a different context of how we understand Pan Africanism and Pan African nationalism. Next one, Peter Esadike argues that Pan Africanism is a political and cultural phenomenon which regards Africa, Africans, and their descendants abroad as a unit. And again, this is more a global Pan African perspective that Esadike provides. Again, to Dr. John Henrik Clark, who argues that Pan Africanism is about the restoration of African people to their proper place in world history, to facilitate and bring about the ingathering of African people throughout the world, and to restore what slavery, and colonialism took away. All right. Now, John Henrik Clark, being a historian, is very focused on, rebuilding this history of African people, and so we can be at the table of respect when we speak about how the world is and how we are going to be moving forward. Dr. Emerson argues that the sense that all Africans have a spiritual affinity with each other, and that having suffered together in the past, slavery, colonialism, they must march together into a new and brighter future. In its fullest realization, it would involve the creation of an African Leviathan in the form of a political organization and association of states. Um, it might also involve an almost infinite variety of regional groupings and collaborative arrangements, which are partial embodiments of the counter-embracing unity, which is the dream of true Pan African, the true Pan Africa. All right, and he's speaking more on developing a concrete um, um, uh, coalition of African people on the continent and throughout the world. All right, moving forward. So the text that I will focus on today, and this is the text that I sent to the class, comes from Kwame Nantambu. It's Pan Africanism versus Pan African nationalism, and Afrocentric analysis. And I wanted to provide, because I like the way he breaks down the different historical facets of Pan Africanism and attempts to, give the long view of what Pan Africanism may mean. So he argues that Pan African nationalism is the nationalistic, unified struggle resistance of African people against all forms of foreign aggression and invasion in the nationhood or nation building. The primary goal of Pan African nationalism is the total liberation and unification of all African people under African communalism. Pan African nationalism seeks to achieve African nationhood and nationality, human perfectibility based on several cardinal principles slash virtues of Mayat. And we talked about Mayat a little bit yesterday with my other class, and that Mayat is self-reliance, self-determination, seven cardinal virtues of Mayat, excuse me, self-reliance, self-determination, the creation of Pan-African national solidarity, and the confraternity of among all African people on the continent and in the diaspora. A cooperative, humanistic, and communal value system, spirituality, and traditional extended family um, modus vivendi, and polycentrism. All right, so he's trying to give a large definition of what it means to be Pan African and move towards a sense of Pan African nationalism. And it is a large undertaking, right? We're talking about working to align over 1 billion people spread throughout the globe. All right, so the idea of Pan Africanism is a large and extremely daunting idea, but I argue as we move along that this idea is worth fighting for. Moving forward, let me get a little drink. Excuse me. Our author Kwame Nantambu also argues that a Pan-African identity should not involve having to define ourselves against any other branch of humanity. Humanity, all right. We're not Pan-African because we're not European, right? We have our own identity, we have our own place on this planet, and we have the right to celebrate and develop that identity towards the future. Right? We don't have to use it as something to keep other people down. He argues that Pan-African identity first began with the efforts towards internal development and nation building. So, to give context to this, he's arguing that when African people started to develop themselves in the Nile Valley, for instance, and started to develop kingdoms and empires, and developed writing and technology. These are the early uh, um, elements of Pan-Africanism, the early elements of Pan-Africanism. Excuse me. In addition, he argues African people have fought against foreign invasion and encroachment for centuries and have worked internally to develop their own and protect their own interests. He argues that the long view of Pan-African unity moves us away from defining our African identity against European non-African identity. Rather, Pan-African identity is to be defined on a cultural identity which is based on collective effort of Africans working to develop their own interests. And again, he's just saying that we are African people not because we're not European, but because we are working to develop our own interests. All right, it's to remove a need for an antagonist, so we are able to develop ourselves based on our own interests rather than based on the idea that we're just not them, right? And I think that's a very important part, that we don't need to be ourselves because we're not them. We are ourselves because of who we are already. And he argues the short view of Pan-African unity is centered on those efforts of African people who resist white supremacy and European hegemony. Now, the short view is very important to this idea of what Pan-Africanism is, but he just does not want to be reliant on Pan-Africanism being um, meshed against or balanced against what is white or what is European. All right, so he breaks down the stages of Pan-African development going back to ancient Egypt, which we will refer to as Kemet in this course, and he moves it forward step by step based on this idea. And again, this is why I wanted to share this article and discuss it, because I like the fact that he takes the long view of Pan-Africanism rather than focusing on the last few centuries. All right, just to give us greater context of who we are. All right. So he argues the first period of unification was characterized by resistance against foreign invasion and the dynastic governance / nation building of the BC or BCE, with before Common Era, in ancient Egypt. All right. Now this includes knowledge development, writing with an eye towards the future, and art and architecture. And just to further tease out these points, so Kemet um, is one of the foundations of human culture throughout the world. Well, when you talk about where things, science and writing and architecture first developed, we're talking about early Kemet. All right, during particularly during the dynastic periods. So during this time, um, African people or the Egyptians, the Kemetic people, Cometians, we'll call them, um, they wrote with an eye towards the future. They wrote in stone, right? They didn't write on paper. They did write on paper, but they didn't only write on paper. They had the means to write on other things, and I believe that this might have been for a reason. That if we write something in stone, it's difficult to destroy, right? Whereas if we write something in paper, a good fire will take care of that, and that destroys, all history, right? If ancient Egyptians or ancient Cometians only wrote on paper, we would know nothing about them, right? Which means that somebody else could easily take credit for what they did, right? But they wrote in stone, they carved in stone, and they wrote, they carved their faces on stone, so generations later we can look at who these people were, right? So we don't have to be reliant on Hollywood renditions of who the ancient Cometians were. We can look back at the stones themselves and say, oh, these are the people. This is what they look like. We can see their facial features. We can, in those instances when they use color, we can see the color, right? And this is an important point because writing in stone, it ensures that later generations will be able to see it. And in architecture, we can see the dynamic things they did with it. So this first period is very important, particularly for us now as African people, as we've been told, time and time again, that African people have no history. Well, we can stop and say, well, no, that's not true, because look at Kemet. And it's not just Kemet. We can look at Nubia, we can look at Kush, we can look at Meroe, we can look at a number of civilizations that go all the way from the base of the Nile, the mouth of the Nile, down to the Great Lake region where it starts. Right, that's called the Nile Valley. That's a 4,000-mile area of culture that has been preserved. A lot of it has been preserved. All right. Now, moving on to the second period, Nantambu argues that the second period of Pan-African development was characterized by the continued resistance against foreign invasion in ancient Kemet to the dawn of the AD era and beyond. The contemporaries, excuse me, with the development of religion, culture, civilization, educational systems, nationhood governance, and the social norms and customs by Africans or Moors under General Jibril Tariq, the Rock of Gibraltar, during the occupation of Spain from 711 to 1485. So what he's speaking about is at the end of the dynastic period of ancient Kemet and the rise of Greece and the rise of Rome, you see a decline in Egyptian culture. Um, the civilization is old. It's 2,000 old, over 2,000 years old by this time. So it's declining. It's tired, and other civilizations are starting to rise up. As is just the way history happens. So the Greeks rise up, and then the Romans rise up, and at this time, around the time we get the changing from the before the Common Era to the Common Era, uh, the the civilization is dying out. But they were fighting their way out. They weren't just laying down. They fought. And from here, we give a number of migrations that spread throughout Africa from ancient Kemet. As Kemet is declining, some of the inhabitants of ancient Kemet start to leave and go to the Western Africa and Southern Africa, in order to preserve their culture and, in order, to just move on. The civilization is declining, so we move on. Um, then this took place until about 400 or 500 in the Common Era. So Egypt really does not fall completely until almost the Muslim era, in the Common Era. Now, when this comes about, we have the rise of the Moors, who are a nation of African people centered mainly in northern Africa, northwest Africa, who uh, um, occupied southern Europe for a number of centuries, from 711 to 1485. So you have about 7 centuries where northwest Africa and southwestern Europe is dominated by African people. And when I say dominated, I do not mean that there was um, severe oppression or slavery. There was a number of dynamic things that the Moors brought to Europe, culture and art and a sense of civilization. So there was a lot of dynamic things that were happening with the Moorish occupation of Spain, and this is an important era as we connect the dots from the ancient world to the new world in terms of African civilization. And during this second period as well, we have the development of large empires in Western Africa. We have the Kingdom of Ghana. Before we have Ghana, the nation state that we know now. We have the Empire of Ghana, and then again before we have the nation state, the modern era nation state Mali. We have the empire, the Malian Empire of medieval Africa, and as well we have the Empire of Songhai. Now these are three very large empires that they rose and fell. So Ghana rose and fell, up rose Mali. Mali rose and fell, then up rose Songhai. And during this period as well, you have um, uh, cultural development, artistic development, agricultural development, intellectual development. One of the largest libraries in the world during this time, during Mali's reign, was the library at Timbuktu, one of the largest libraries on the planet at the time. And again, this speaks to the intellectual development that was a critical part of Africa's growth from the ancient world to the new world. All right, so again, destroying any belief that African people did not have culture and did not have civilization, as we are seeing that this has been the case for 5,000 years, and it continues to grow. All right, go to the third period. Now, this third period of Pan African development comes during the age of colonialism. So third period from the 15th to the 19th century was a period of revolutionary Pan-African nationalism that was characterized by physical resistance against being captured as slaves on the continent. And there were a number of wars and revolts that were fought before we even get to the slave ships. All right, so African people have never been passive in this oppressive state that we're seem to be trapped in now. We've never been passive in it. So from the beginning, there were fights and wars and skirmishes and battles against the process of enslavement. And then we have slave revolts that happen all over the Americas. There's hundreds of them, and that's actually one of the my interests that I've been studying for a number of years. The different slave revolts that happen throughout the Caribbean, South America, all over the United States. um, just a couple. One of the names: Nat Turner led a slave rebellion um, in Virginia, I believe it was Virginia. Samuel Sharp, I believe Samuel Sharp was in Jamaica. Um, Paul Couffet, he was he developed the early African American or early African Masonry. Digimar Vesey had a revolt in Virginia as well. You have Toussaint Louverture, who liberated Haiti. Um, um, so excuse me, and and then we have the intellectual development that came along with this. So not only do you have a number of names that were physically fighting against European oppression, European hegemony, we have a number of personalities who were fighting academically or intellectually. That is, right? So some of the intellectual champions are Bishop Henry McNick Turner, Martin Delaney, Alexander Crummell. That's a typo. It's a Crummell spelled with a C. Henry Highland Garnett, David Walker, and Edward Wilmot Blyden, and there's a number of other names. I just didn't want to bog down the text with a number of names, with too many names. And then we also have wars that are going on the African continent. So this is not just happening in the diaspora. It is definitely happening in the diaspora and Haiti and the uprisings of Jamaica. But we also have Africans continuing to fight and push for their own interests and their own survival on the continent. The Anungo Wars, the Ashanti Wars, and the Zulu Wars are just a few examples. There's a few examples of the many, many wars, skirmishes, battles that were fought to fight against European hegemony and to work to develop African interests in a global context. All right. Let's moving along.
Dr.
Yes,
Easterling,
yes.
would it be okay if we take a pause, if you don't mind, at your indulgence, to sort of unpack some of the things you've already laid out? I think
Sure.
you've
Yes.
given us so much to think about before we go into a
Yes.
intellectual overload here. I'm, initially, in fact, on your very first slide, Ebenezer has some questions and some contributions based on your readings that you assigned. So, I mean, I think I will stand to really gain from what he wants to share with that regards, and then maybe we could piggyback to your slides. Is
Definitely.
that okay with
Yes.
you, please?
Oh, yes. Definitely. Yeah. And Ebenezer, if you want to say something, just raise your hand. I'll stop at any point. Yes. So yes.
Ebenezer, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. and Doc. The study or the readings quite interesting because prior to my readings, I've always thought that the struggle for independence, which is from the colonial dictatorship era, began quite recently because our readings in our literature over here, suggest so. Some of the things I chanced on or I have known, thought from a Ghana's perspective, we gained our colonial independence from the British, which began prior to 1957. But I chanced on some readings which got me excited because of the work Kwame Natambo had done. And he's categorized them into eras or periods. And it's amazing. For example, we knew about 1958, some efforts by Kwame Nkrumah to kind of put all the other nations which were not liberated together. For example, we had a speech he made that the independence of Ghana of Africa will not be achieved if other states, even though Ghana had were still under colonial bondage. So he made efforts with meetings, several meetings, some of which I chanced on and I read. And it's exciting to know that it predates way back, as the Kwame Natambo had postulates.
Yeah.
And this is what I would just want to, if time permits, I could share with you some of those things I got.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's very important. What you're bringing up, because Kwame Nkrumah had a vision, and he understood that if it can't be just Ghana getting liberation, because this is a small area on a large continent, and we're literally surrounded by the enemy. So that's why he had the forethought to go out and be like, okay, we're going to do this in Ghana, and we may be the first, but you guys need to get your stuff together too, because after we do it, these Europeans, they might come back harder for us. And instead of allowing Ghana to be recolonized or re-enslaved, if there's a pattern of and a trend towards decolonization, Europeans would be less apt to fight against it, because it would cost them in lives, it would cost them in money, and it cost them in time. So Kwame Nkrumah's vision is just spectacular. I love Kwame Nkrumah, because he understood if this is not done collectively, it's not going to get done. Or it's going to get done, and then we might fall back even further.
Beautiful.
I mean, for me, I think when you were sharing about the movements and periods, what I'm getting from it is that the Pan-African movements have been about a quest and thirst for knowledge. I mean, that is what I was okay. I would say knowledge and freedom, both of them. That is really, and so it behooves us as African people to wake up every day and spend every moment of our lives on this intellectual quest for knowledge and this quest for freedom.
Yep.
That is what Pan-Africanism is all about. Based on the little that I've heard, I mean, you sort of couch it in historical terms. You went from Kemet, and you talked about the Africans in Europe, the Moors, and then back to the continent. In each of those periods, what I'm seeing is a people who are interested in gaining wisdom and in liberating themselves.
Sure.
Yes.
And so, when I talk to Africans, and I always ask folks, what are you doing for your intellectual well-being? What are you doing to learn more? So it's not just enough that you want to make ends meet, right? Or you could have a job. That's fine. That's all good and dandy. But to be a true Pan-African, you have to engage your mind. And for me, it's so refreshing that I'm in this classroom right now with Ebenezer. Mr. Ebenezer, are you in Uganda or in Ghana? I know you are Ghanaian, but where are you?
I'm in Ghana, Accra.
Okay, you're in Accra. Isn't it beautiful? We're on this platform.
In Accra, Ghana.
And then we have Ebenezer in Accra, Ghana right now.
Yeah, the Black
and
Star.
Then we have
yes.
Dr. Paul Easterling, who is on the east coast of the US, an African American, teaching an African about Pan-Africanism. Isn't that beautiful? and Ebenezer is excited. So I'm inspired by the reading. I'm engaged by the reading, and you just introduced him to a world that he wasn't aware of initially. So I really thank you so much, Dr. Paul Easterling, for engaging Ebenezer as a student on the very first week of class, and he was so eager to contribute. And I think somebody raised their hand, but Dr. Paul, please don't let us derail you. But I just wanted to make sure that we are listening to the student, to Ebenezer, and then perhaps you can go ahead and continue with your slides.
Yeah, what we're talking about is actually feeding right into the next part. And again, Kwame Nkrumah is extremely dynamic, and we go into that further. Yeah. And so this brings us to the fourth period, and this is the period in the early 20th century. This is the critical period that we just started talking up. So this period was characterized by the intellectual, geopolitical, scientific, and cultural Pan-African nationalism of the 20th century, exemplified by W.E.B. Du Bois, Henry Sylvester Williams, Kwame Nkrumah, Maurice Bishop, George Padmore, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, and the list goes on, right? So we can see the list. I'll let you read the list for yourself, but I wanted to further uh, uh, implore about the importance of this period. All right, so let's take Kwame Nkrumah. All right, Kwame Nkrumah, when he came to the United States and studied, he went to Lincoln University. Now, why is that special? Because Lincoln University is an HBCU, a historically black college slash university in the United States. So he came here to the United States and went to where he saw his people, right? He came here and he joined a fraternity, a black fraternity, Phi Beta Sigma. So his mindset when he got to the States was to unite with other black people in any way he could, right? He went to a black university, he joined a black fraternity, right? He conversed and talked with the boys and went to lectures, and he was involved in the intelligentsia of Pan Africanism in the United States. Then he went back to Ghana. Then he went back to Ghana and he started to develop this idea of Ghana as a nation state. All right. We're not talking about Ghana, the empire of medieval Africa. We're talking about Ghana, the nation state of the 20th century. And he started to develop this idea of the nation state. And he chose for the symbol of that nation state as it developed as the Black Star. Now, what is the Black Star? The Black Star is the symbol of Marcus Garvey's Pan African movement, who was from Jamaica. He developed the Black Star ship line, which he meant for the Black Star ship line to start shipping African people back to the continent from the New World. All right, and this symbol that was developed by a Jamaican who went to Harlem to develop his organization, the UNIA. He took the symbol, the Black Star, and took that as what will be on the flag in Ghana. Now that is Pan African movement, right? Ideas in Jamaica and ideas in the United States and this intellectual development in Ghana, and all this comes together to help to develop the first nation state, the first post-colonial nation state in Africa. Now that to me is a shining, beautifully shining example of Pan-African unity, right? It's developed by the genius of Kwame Nkrumah, working with other African people, both historical and who he dealt with in his present, with a clear vision for the future. That to me is this fourth period is one of my favorite periods in this development of Pan Africanism, and as well during this time to give it to move on from the intellectual point of view to the more physical. Uh, um, there were anti-colonial movements happening all over the continent at this time. People physically fighting, engaging in wars to liberate themselves from the oppression of Europeans. All right, Nigeria, Kenya, the Malma of Kenya, the struggles in South Africa, and all over the continent. You see this strong push, this physical as well as intellectual push against colonialism, against oppression, against European hegemony. And furthermore, at this point, I have to bring up the work of Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, because Sheikh Anta Diop of Senegal developed a way to look into the past to towards Kemet, towards ancient Egypt in particular, for us to understand that these people are African. He developed tests to measure the amount of melanin in the mummified bodies, right? Which again might speak to why the ancient Cometians mummified bodies in the first place to preserve what 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 might be destroyed in the future, right? They had a clear vision for the future. So Sheikh Anta Diop, he worked to develop our understanding that ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet were African people. So if we are capable of doing this, right, in ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, we can do anything, and that's the importance of the intellectual development of Sheikh Anta Diop. We are sitting here, all of us, kind of intellectual children of Sheikh Anta Diop, and the powerful work that he did in working against European colonial thought and European intellectual hegemony. And we'll move on. That's the fourth period. Now, the fifth period I developed for myself. So this moves beyond what Dr. Tambu argues in his text, and I push it a little bit further because I believe that we're in the midst of another renaissance going on. And this argues the late 20th century and the early 21st century. Right now, what's going on? Pan African unity is defined by the continued development of culture and knowledge, as well as the continued resistance to white supremacy and European hegemony. And I developed this part because I didn't see anything about the anti-apartheid movement in Dr. Tambu's analysis, and that it might be in part because that it's a later development. We didn't get the destruction of apartheid till the early '90s. We was well into the late 20th century before we get this. Right, South Africa had a particularly arduous struggle, so that's important to acknowledge. All right, and then after apartheid, we get the presidency of Mandela, and that's a critical point to acknowledge. I would argue that hip hop culture itself is a clear example of a continued resistance against European hegemony. The idea of the Afrocentric paradigm that was developed in the African American intelligentsia here in the late '80s and the early '90s. Dr. Molefi Asante, for instance, Dr. Walana Karenga, a number of these thinkers that we will talk about further. But this is starting to develop as well in this fifth period. And then in further, into the 21st century, we got development of Black Lives Matter. We have End SARS in Africa, in Nigeria to be specific. We have the movement for reparations, and then we have the continued development of Black art. And I'm thinking about the movies that's come out the last few years. The Black Panther movie, for instance, some of Jordan Peele's work that works hard to put Africa and African people at the center of our discussion, of our perspective of the world. And this is what I term as the fifth period of Pan African development. um, Cultural Pan Africanism. Natambu argues that cultural Pan African nationalism are individuals whose work is focused on development of negritude, the African personality, and cultural tools for liberation, the challenge of exposing existing oppressive Eurocentric social norms and status quo. It seeks to return and relocate African people to their original cultural heritage. Now, this relocation, it doesn't have to be physical, right? So if you don't have to physically go back to Africa to be African, it's a sense of who you are, right? Malcolm X used to say that if I have a cat and that cat bears kittens in an oven, I don't call them biscuits, right? They're still cats. So just as African people are born outside of Africa, they're still African people and they're still culturally African people. So we move through the world in this same fashion. He argues that what is needed now is for African people to go through the process of Afrocentrification, or the global of the Afrocentric global re-education using African standard curriculum, so that we will thus be able to cure ourselves of the deadly disease of Afrocirrhosis that miseducation, Eurocentric analysis, and the Urugu virus have inflicted upon us. And the Urugu is according to author and intellectual, African-centered intellectual Maremba Ani, Urugu is the incomplete and destructive of being rejected by the creator. And this comes out of the Dogon philosophy of Mali. All right. Now there are some analytical problems that I just, for the intellectual purposes, I just needed to highlight in order that we talk about these things. That an African identity is a modern expression, right? And it might not translate well in the ancient world. So we have ancient Kemet. Um, they understand themselves, as Kemetic people, but if we were to bring that idea, the idea of Pan-Africanism to them in the past, it might not make sense. It might make sense after we tell them the history, but it might not translate well into their understanding. So to make the argument that the early Kemetic people were working towards a sense of African identity, it might not translate well. Yes, they made sure that their information and their knowledge was kept, and that they made sure that people knew who they were. But what we understand now, the importance of who they are now, it might not translate well. And prior to the modern era, most African people would identify themselves by their nation name or their tribe, and that this collective Pan African understanding again might not translate well. And again, this is a consequence of our interactions with Europeans, right? We've had to we've had to pull ourselves in order to survive. All right, I hope that makes sense. We've had to regroup ourselves and understand ourselves as a collective people in order to fight against what we're moving against. So these are consequences of the modern era. Um, to move further, the works in reading of Nantambu's work, he works to create separation using nomenclature. So he delineates Pan African nationalism from Pan Africanism or any other type of nomenclature, and I think that that is just it was problematic in that he needed to work towards bringing the ideas together rather than setting himself apart. And that's just my intellectual take on his ideas. It's like he worked to carve his own ideas out, but rather than trying to kind of bring it all in. And lastly, Africa is not a monolith. Who is African translates differently based on cultural context. So, to provide an example, in South Africa, there are hard lines between who is black, who is colored, and who is white. Right? These lines are very hard and they're rigid. But in the U.S., if you have one drop of black blood, you black, right? That's just the way it works for us. It's because that's how we were treated, right? It doesn't matter you had two white grandparents. If one of those black grandparents were black, you were black, regardless of how light skinned you might be, right? Regardless of how fair or straight your hair might be, because that's our context. So a black person from America who was light skinned like myself would go to South Africa and be considered colored, right? So we have to consider these things as we move forward, trying to bring a billion people together. Again, I started out this conversation talking about the daunting task that Pan Africanism is, and these are the things that we have to deal with, right? We have to deal with our understanding of culture, of context, and how we are to be in this world together, all right? And we have to be respectful of others, of our respective histories, right? our history in the United States is a bit different from that of the South Africa, different from those in Ghana. But if we find the commonality, that common kernel, of our culture, we can move forward with that in very productive ways. And
It's Easterling.
yeah,
Oh, is that
that's
it?
it.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
that's it.
Perfect.
That's the bibliography for the text. Just take a look at that, and that's it.
I think, just so you know, someone raised their hands. One of the students, Mr. Carlo, his hand is raised. So, Carlo, do you mind turning on your video so we could we can hear your question? Mr. Carlo, there you go. You are mute.
Mute.
Unmute yourself, please.
You're on mute.
You have to unmute yourself.
We can't hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I have done. Yes. Although the article came a very bit late to me yesterday, due to time differences.
Yeah.
So I have to rush my readings. So
Yeah.
without making a proper note, but at a glance, I can see that they are categorized with Eurocentric in the sub-Sahara and the trans-Sahara and other things they call there. But what I'm most concerned about is the Pan-African movement of the nationalism. So I was very much interested in the movement of the nationalists because they have a very strong mind, because their mind was the kind we don't have in this our generation, because the kind of mind they have then, that is better that they die. I don't think any of us have it now, because we are afraid of so many things. We want to protect our life, we want to protect our family, we want to protect our wealth. So we don't have that kind of mind. But the only question I want to raise is how the whole thing started in Kemet, because I can see Kemet is a trans-Saharan, where it's mostly dependent on the Sahara deserts, which make up Arabians. So I'm trying to bring out there that it's a little bit complicated, because most of us down in the West Africa, we see ourselves a little bit quite, let me say, skeptic from the Arabians, although I don't see African origin originating from the Arabian origin. I'm trying to see another kind of question there too, which the Pharaoh then, what his name are there, was able to join the two Niles. So his effort was quite recommendable. So I see some to have some of this movement, although AU in Africa now is pushing forward to that, which some of the countries are becoming members, of which Nigeria became a member just last week of this month. And although the effectiveness is coming up by January 1st of 2021, we are still hoping to know how this movement will go about. Thank you.
Let me just say that we have officially ended the Ubuntu dialogue, but we're going to remain on here for a little while for people who have questions. So perhaps Dr. Easterling, you can go ahead and address the question. I think the first one I heard is about the fact that when he thinks of Kemet or Egypt today, he thinks of Arab, right? People from the Arab. So he's trying to figure out, okay, how are they Africans how is Kemet African, essentially?
All right. So Yeah, e- Egypt presently, yes, is Arab. So when we speak about Kemet, ancient Kemet, we're speaking about 4,000 years ago. All right, and this was well before Arabia or Islam was a thing. It was well before that. All right, so the movement of African people developed along the Nile Valley. So when we talk about the Nile Valley, we are talking about Kemet, but we're also talking about a large 4,000-mile area, and within that area, black people, as they have symbolized themselves on the walls and in the architecture, they symbolize themselves as black people, not as Arabian, right? This notion of a lighter skinned people coming from Egypt is a product of the invasion by the Greeks and the invasion by the Romans. All right, so this is something that happened on the tail end of Egypt, the tail end of Kemet. We're talking about what 500, around the year 500, 300 BCE. All right, and when I was speaking about ancient Kemet, I'm speaking 2600 BCE, right? So 2,000 years before we get 2,000 years before we get to the Greeks and the Romans and the invasions, we have African peoples building ancient Kemet, and the Arab invasion of this area did not happen well into the Common Era. So we're speaking about 500 CE, about 1,500 years ago, right? And again, the long view. We got the long view of what Pan Africanism is. So it's two. We're speaking about Egypt 4,500 years ago, 4 millennia, over 4 millennia ago, and that's why we have to have this long view, right? We don't see.
Let me throw
We
in,
don't.
let
We
me
don't see
throw
the.
in something. I'm not interrupting you.
Say it again.
Yes, okay. Yes, let me clarify the whole thing more better, because artist categories, he categorized the intellectuals and the geopoliticals and the other group of people he was mentioning. What I'm most interested in is the scientific Pan-Africanism, because these are the people that are bringing up this light to the whole Africa, because I believe they should keep on this light shining so that they will not hide it from anyone.
Yeah.
So each and every one of us can see the brightness of this light from
Right.
the scientific Pan-Africanism.
Right. And to further speak on this development and the Pan Africanism in the modern age, you said that you didn't believe that people in the modern age have the same fight as we did decades ago, and I would have to push against that statement again to my last slide, that we see a lot of development right now in the African world. Again, the Black Lives Matter movement is connecting all over the world. It is centered in the United States, but it's also being observed in other countries. And SARS movement in Nigeria as well has gained a lot of interest here in the United States. And again, the intellectual development the Afrocentric paradigm, the artistic development of hip hop culture, which is again centered in the United States, but it's spread all over the planet. These are essentially, I will argue, these are essentially African intellectual and artistic movements that are working to keep people informed and grounded in their cultural beingness. Uh, we have any more questions? I know we're running over a little bit.
There's questions on the
Okay,
Q&A
okay,
chat.
okay. Let me. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, he said go ahead. There should be a question. The question in the chat room, Dr. Marachi.
Yeah, there's a question here. It's not actually on the chat. I think it's on the not on the Q&A chat. Just trying to fish that out. Okay, someone is asking, well, a comment first. As a matter of fact, there is no such thing as the Middle East that is invented to pull that region out of Africa. Where is our Middle West, Middle North, Middle South? So I don't know if you want to shed more light on that.
Yeah, that's an argument, a worthy argument that I've encountered a number of times. It includes, grouping that Arabian Peninsula into the whole of Africa, and culturally speaking, I don't have any issue with that in particular at all. Um, Again, the Arab, the modern day Muslim. Again, this is something that is kind of more recent, right?
Mhm.
Right, and we're speaking about ancient Kemet, and we're speaking, a long time ago. And that's also again to add that there's still a very large black population in Egypt. Yes, it is governmentally run. Politically, the structure is run by Muslims and what we will call one
Mhm.
what one might call Arabs, but it's still a black nation. It is still in Africa, regardless of how hard people have tried to remove it from Africa, and
Okay.
it's still African people there.
Okay, I think there's one question here that I need to ask, and it says, just as it is common with some of us Africans, how do we deal with people who do not support the Pan-African movement? They'll rather die as slaves in the land of their colonial masters.
How do you deal with those people? Um,
Hmm.
Show and prove. Keep working. Do what you can to help who you can. If somebody does not want to hear or listen to your perspective, you can't force them. So let them walk their own journey. Let them walk their own path, and their path may lead back to yours. It may not, and that will be their destiny. But we can't force people, and it does not help us at all to look down on a person just because they don't agree with us or see our perspective. So just keep moving forward and do what you do, and don't let them discourage you.
Wow, I think we've just run out of time, but I have pretty much learned a lot today. I haven't, I mean, if you had allowed me time to read the books or read the literatures, I wouldn't have gotten all the knowledge that I'm getting from today's meeting. So thank you so very much, Dr. Paul Easterling, for having made history so easy to understand, and complex things, you've just simplified everything. Thank you so much. I also want to appreciate our Usomis that have joined us today. Very interesting conversations, and I can see that they genuinely read, the pretext reading. So thank you, Carlo and Ebenezer. I think he just got kicked out by network, but thank you so much for engaging with the conversation today. And, congratulations to you, Dr. Paul Easterling, for this start. Thank
Thank
you.
you, thank you,
Yes,
and
and all our attendees as well. Thank you for
yeah,
coming today for the Ubuntu Global Dialogue. I don't know if there are any, announcements before we wrap up today's event.
I have one to my class, to those who are enrolled. Please review, continue to review module 1, and I will be posting everything you will need for module 2 by Monday of this coming week. So next week we prepare for module 2. Module 2, I'll send you readings, and we'll go on further with this discussion. And thank you for those who attended.
Okay, Dr. Paul, please, for the benefit of those who are attending, and maybe someone just listening to you today have just made up their mind that they want to enroll for the course, how can they go about that? If you can just, tell them what to do.
It's the collective action course. You have to go to the Osiri University website, and enroll through there. And it's osiriuniversity.org. and you'll be able to enroll through there. And as well, you'll be able to, look at all the other courses. We have a lot of dynamic courses out there. So, yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Carlo, please.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say that as we talk about Pan-Africanism, we oftentimes will get like a buzz in our bodies. We feel excited about connecting. Like last week, when Professor Siri McDougall, the African American professor of ethnic studies, came on here, I remember how he was reflecting upon his time in Ghana with Dr. Paul Easterling, and I could tell he was excited, and I could see the smile on his face, and on one hand, I was happy to be able to glean and share that moment with all of you, but on the other hand, I felt kind of I felt really sad. That we have a lot of work to do because it seems like Pan-Africanism is still very superficial. It's at this point it's all about, oh, okay, let's go visit Ghana. Oh, let's put on our clothes. There is no it's not very substantive, and I know
Yep.
we are working towards it.
Yeah.
And I contrast it with pan-Europeanism, so to speak, and in that sense, they don't even make any noise, but they are doing it. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you have a UK passport, you are welcome to the US anytime. If you have a German passport, you are welcome to the US anytime. They travel to these European countries at will, and they're able to conduct business easily, and they do trade easily. And I'm just wondering, what has happened to us? I couldn't help but think that what has happened to us is a very terrible thing. That what we are left to celebrate is nothing short of the superficial. And so, I think we have work to do. We have to quickly go beyond this superficial celebrations and start really thinking about ways we can engage intellectually, engage in trade and in travel and in culture, because that is what the Pan-African or Europeans are doing, right? And Africans are locked out of it. Let's face it. So I think that's something we need to think about as we leave this first module of your course. How to begin to concretize things moving forward.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. Again, just something else I said is that we number 1 billion people on this planet, and we're spread all over it. So there is no reason as to why we cannot start developing ourselves intellectually and in a collective sense. 1 billion people on the continent and throughout the world. 1 billion people. That's a lot. That's a lot of human potential right there, and that is what we have to do. And to not be superficial with it. I agree with you 100%, Dr.
I mean, if you just think about Simon Cowell, right? For example, from the UK. I mean, he comes to the US and dominates the entertainment industry. He has it's a great green pass. I mean, that's a beautiful thing to see, right? Was it Morgan Pearson? Is his name? He's from the UK, came here, became a CNN host, and the reverse is also the case. Americans go to Europe, and so we see that working. And again, not that I have any qualms with it. There's no problem with that at all. It's just that Africans are locked out from that in a very systematic fashion, and we've also learned to do it to ourselves because we as Africans actually, if you look at it from the travel point of view, we welcome people with American passports, with European passports more easily than we welcome
Right.
other Africans,
Right.
right? You know, so
Man, that's
this
right.
is a terrible thing, like I said, that's really happened to us, and you know, and
Now,
I'm yeah, yes, please.
if I may, I mean, what you said is also speaks to what the last speaker last week was talking about, the change in mindset, because even for us as Africans with the ECOWAS passport, so I have a Nigerian passport, for example, and you want to go to West African country, doing business is not even easy, even with the ECOWAS passport.
Right.
And, you know, this also speaks to the mindset, how we treat ourselves, how we see ourselves, how we want to advance ourselves as a people, as a nation, as a community. And, you know, sometimes, you know, speaking about the NSAS and all the things that have been happening in Africa, we need to think about, this is our problem. How do we fix it? How do we fix this mindset?
Right.
And I think it really starts with our mentality, to be honest. We can't expect other people to treat us better when we don't even see value in ourselves.
Exactly.
You know, there's a whole lot of travel that we need to go, we need to do as a people. And it's sad to see that in this day and age, we haven't quite made meaningful steps in that direction.
Yeah. And that's why I brought that up last week, because I mean, just personally speaking, when when I did make trips back to Africa, the first time it's just like, wow, I'm here. But one of the things I noticed, that thing with the passport that you brought up, that's one of the first things I noticed when we landed, because we just walked through, and I looked to my left and I saw this line of people waiting to get in. I was like, no, I felt immediately. I felt it. I was like, oh man, I can't even escape, European hegemony when I come back here. I just got reminded of it right there. Walking into the country, I got reminded of European hegemony.
But again, in the UK is a different story, because they can walk through freely with their passport. But then if you look at the queue on the other side, they're all people without the UK passport.
Yeah.
So again, in Africa, it's the flip side. I mean, it's very interesting that you brought that up as well. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think we'd have to wrap up about this. I think Professor is saying something about research. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's the other class.
Okay, then.
So
so we'll wrap up here. We have another class on research methodology. So, I mean, our attendees, you're welcome to also join in if you want to. So we'll close the session today. I just want to say thank you to everyone who spent time to come in today. It's much appreciated. We love you all, and Ubuntu to you all.
Ubuntu.
Have a good day. Ubuntu.
Okay, Mr. Carlos, we see you in the other class.